Welcome back, everybody, from day 2 of Environment Day. We come up with that name. Right, we're starting off the day with a series of short presentations. We have 5 short presentations, then we're going to have a break, and then we've got a final session, a 3 long presentation. I think that's what I need to say. And start by handing over to Rob.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here. I'm going to present my paper, which is my job market paper on the general equilibrium effects of anti-deforestation policies. It's from Brazil. So, brief motivation. Conservation policies are often localized. There's typically this is true for marine conservation areas, for forest conservation. The leading policies tend to be kind of cracking down on the enforcement of the protection of a given place. And that often raises the concern. This is one of the word used in conservation circles, is leakage. And there's always debates about what to do about the potential problem of leakage, the fact that there could be unexpected losses of anticipated carbon benefits or biodiversity benefits due to the displacement of activities in the project area to areas outside the project. This little graph is showing some indigenous reserves in the Amazon. This is the Brazilian Amazon, and I will show the full map later, but that's kind of the deforestation frontier. Everything green is forest, everything red has been deforested between 2000 and 2020. And you can see these indigenous protected areas have been quite well protected. There are some red dots here, but it's as if the spread of this deforestation, the red, kind of goes around it. And the question emerges of how much did this actually, in general, how much did this area in general equilibrium reduce deforestation? How much did it simply displace? So a little bit about the context. This is the broader image, and you can see here, there's that area. You can really see the borders. Brazil has a third of the world's rainforest, so very important context to look at this. And it has very high rates of forest loss. The average yearly forest loss between the period of 1985 to 2021 has been roughly the area of Wales. And it is pretty much all driven by all perfectly correlated almost with the expansion of agricultural land. So that's not to say that the cause is agriculture, but that's the subsequent use of the land. And it is almost entirely illegal. Some statistics valid that say 94% of it is illegal. So that means it doesn't have the specific permits it would need according to Brazilian law. And there's a lot of laws in paper that have been there since the 60s that are not really applied in practice. So most of the policies that to prevent deforestation are heavily targeted, they're heavily localized. There's the extreme case of the protected areas and indigenous territories that are a specific demarcated territory that has a different jurisdiction and cannot become private property. But what I'm going to focus on is slightly different, and I'll explain why, is this blacklisted municipalities policy, which targets specifically those municipalities that have the highest rates of deforestation in the previous year. So it was started in 2008. 36 municipalities were chosen based on the level of deforestation in the previous year, just the highest ones in terms of levels. So the ones that had the most square kilometers deforested. And then subsequently more were added. And this is a command and control policy. There was intensified law enforcement in the form of fines and farm embargoes, increased monitoring activities, economic sanctions, different political pressures to the majors, and differences estimation of their effect shows approximately a half standard deviation reduction in deforestation in those places. Now, a problem that emerges is, in light of this concern of leakage, differences in differences approach is going to be biased if we believe leakage is large. Because we will be comparing the trend, basically the parallel trend will be violated if the untreated regions are actually treated by increased demand from the lack of deforestation where it was supposed to happen. So in order to get at those spillovers, we need some assumption about their structure. So this could come either from reduced form methods that this could come either from reduced form methods that say it's decaying resistance, how exposed to spillovers, how exposed to leakage different places are. But this might be problematic. We don't really know if a region that's extremely far away, when does it start being a good control? If there's a lot of trade throughout Brazil, and these are kind of very well-oiled agricultural markets. So the approach that I'm gonna take is to do a completely simulation-based estimation of the leakage by building a general equilibrium model of the Brazilian economy that mostly focuses on calibrating the agricultural sector. It has trade and migration, and I built it on Peters and Eckert's model and add a yearly endogenous deforestation that solves an optimization problem. So this is a little bit the sketch of the model. I take the micro region, which you can think of as commuter zones. There's costly trade, pre-migration, and I'm gonna back up from the data some exogenous TFPs. There are some initial agricultural land endowments. I'll back out amenities as well. And we have in this current version 4 sectors. There's non-agriculture and then 3 agricultural sectors. So temporary crops, permanent crops, and pastures. Preferences are non-homothetic between agriculture and non-agriculture. And an important parameter will be the substitutability between the sectors and the substitutability between the origins of the different sectors in a standard Armington model way. Crucially, agriculture takes land and labor as inputs, and they differ in land share. So the land intensity in their Cobb-Douglas function is very different. So you should think of, for example, pasture having very little labor requirements, very large land requirements, soy having a much lower land share. And what else is relevant? Well, the main thing is that we have these dynamics of land accumulation. So each year there's going to be some set amount of agricultural land that's already there, that's exogenous. I'm going to assume for now exogenous regeneration rate. So some part of that agricultural land would revert back to forest every year if nothing happens. There's no further kind of efforts to clear. And there's this endogenous deforestation, which has basically it has convex costs. So that each year there will be a finite amount of deforestation that is dependent on the demand for land and the supply of land. So a way to think about the dynamics, ignoring the regeneration for now, just you kind of visualize that this is happening, is there is some agricultural land demand, which will keep fixed for the moment. This is depending on how much people want to consume agricultural goods and how productive land is. And in each period, there's some initial level of agricultural land, and then there's a supply curve based on these increasing marginal costs that will determine an equilibrium level of deforestation that sets a new initial level of agricultural land. So in the following period, the supply curves keep shifting. Now, how does leakage happen in this model? This is a little diagram, diagram that explains what happens. You should think there's some regions that are going to be blacklisted. So they will have a reduction in their productivity of deforestation. Now, just to look at an extreme case, I'm going to set it to 0. And those regions will see a decrease in deforestation that is mechanic, which will reduce the supply of agricultural land. And then depending on what is their suitability for different agricultural commodities, that will reduce the supply of different agricultural goods. And then that reduced supply of agricultural goods is gonna be substituted away between non-agricultural goods, the gray, and also agricultural goods from other places. So this is gonna depend on various preference parameters and the statistical substitution and trade costs between the different regions. Then That in turn will lead to more demand for agricultural land in these other places, which will lead to more deforestation. Don't pay too much attention to all the parameters there. Basically, this depends on preferences, and these variables depend on the production functions. And the last one, specifically on the elasticity of deforestation and the kind of production function of deforestation. Yeah, it's a very macro approach to look at this issue. I'm going to use data from various sources, mostly map biomas for all the satellite images on land use, population census for information on labor, and also the agricultural census for information on revenues from different crops, and also on labor for different agricultural activities, and more data to calibrate to estimate some of the parameters. So I'm not going to go in detail through this slide. The key takeaway here is there's some parameters that are estimated from outside the model, which are the ones that don't have kind of regional subscripts. And then there's the regional fundamentals that make heterogeneity across phase important, that I just got them from a modeling version. So that will be the sector region PFPs, which come from the revenues in the agricultural census of the different commodities, and the regional amenities. And now this is kind of the model fit for now. This is the land prices from the data and the land prices from the model. The wages after some adjustment, because I am not going to go into those details. Basically, I'm assuming in the model right now that there are constant returns to scale in the agricultural production functions, and the wage is actually like a marginal product of labor net of land. But because there are other very important inputs into agricultural production, they're kind of by the wage. So I have to adjust for that. Yeah, there's a bit of underestimation in the model, but underestimation. Okay. Now, the counterfactual that I'm going to do is emulating the priority municipalities, the blacklisted municipalities policy. I'm not really trying to estimate their effects at the moment. I'm just trying to emulate it to see the spatial patterns and the different mechanisms that go on in leakage. So this is just showing how the microregions deforestation distribution goes and how concentrated it is. If you just take the top out of 500 something, that's a very sizable percentage, like 10% of all the deforestation. And the counterfactual exercise would be to just completely ban deforestation in those places and perfectly enforce it. And then I'm going to simulate forward 4 paths for 20 years. The policy, but a path without policy and without migration, a path with the ban, yeah, forget about migration, but basically a path with the policy and a path without the policy. So I'm not really trying to fit 20 years in the future, but just looking at just incorporating this dynamic component in a simulation. So for example, this is how agricultural land would evolve without the policy. It would keep increasing, whereas with the policy, it would actually decrease a little bit. This is for the whole of Brazil. Now, this is how leakage would distribute in space. This is if you just look at square kilometers. Now, obviously, larger regions are going to have larger areas. So this is how it looks as a percentage of the area of the region. And you see it's mostly in areas. So the black is obviously where it was banned. And you see that arc of deforestation. And it's mostly towards the more populated areas that you see the leakage and not deeper into the Amazon, and states that typically send migrants into the Amazon, like the Northeast, or there's like, yeah, southern and southwestern parts also have more increases in deforestation. This is how it looks at the percentage of the no-ban level, so the percentage increase relative to their own level if there wasn't a ban. So kind of slightly different patterns, and obviously it responds to distance, but not in a clear-cut way. There's also, I can also show you some effects on GDP and agricultural shares. 1 minute. There's a little bit of substitution away from pasture into other crops because it makes sense. There's movement outside of those areas that are better for pasturing to areas where there's more infrastructure to the soil. There's some robustness checks. There's some negative effects on GDP, but they're not very sizable. So yeah, some next steps that I would like to always to open a little bit. This relies very heavily on what values for the deforestation PFP back out. So I would like to open a little bit that black box, see what it correlates, what could be mobile, what could be mobile from it, what are like weather factors, what are more policy factors. How does it depend on kind of the border of the forest and the distance to roads? There's a lot of kind of things that maybe for further work. And also, I think this could be really interesting. I think the spillovers are relative. Where is it? The spillovers are relatively small in terms of percentage. They're about 8% after 20 years. They're about 10% after 20 years, like between 10 and 15 in that region. And I think they're quite small because the targeting of the places with most deforestation works relatively well. So the other places don't seem to be as good at deforestation. But what if the target was completely different, with the spillovers be massively larger? That's kind of something I'd like to see and compared to other kinds of actions. Yeah. Thank you.